Hello and welcome to the Wednesday session for Composition 2, Section 3003, with me, Mr. Fowler, and several of your fellow classmates. If you're watching this in the future, I hope that you find our discussion interesting and relevant. And if you tune in just a little bit after the beginning of the session, now you'll know what, if anything, that you missed. So we're here today, post-election day, still with not a result, which is kind of interesting to say the least. But you know what? Hopefully in the days and weeks to come, we'll have an official announcement. I would hope sometime before the end of the day, but that may be too hopeful this year because of all of the voting that needs to be counted. From mail-in voting and the results that have not yet been reported in certain states. So we will see how that goes. But in the meantime and in between time, we are going to talk about three specific things today. We're going to do our standard preview / review. We're going to complete our discussions over Chapter 6 in the Princess Bride. I'm going to wrap up Chapter 6. This will be Chapter 6, Part 2. And then we will finish with today's discussion by making sure that we talk about our final essay project of the semester. So we're going to spend some time this week during this session in particular introducing that project, and if time permits, sort of fielding questions about that project. Now, if we don't have as much time to cover questions or concerns about the last project today, we will certainly take that up next Monday. And of course, you can email me about any distinct ideas or questions or details that you want more information about at any time. So let's go ahead and get into it today. I'm going to start with my sharing screen option here. And I'm going to go ahead and share this PowerPoint for today. All right, so for today's session number 23, I think that's going to be out of 30 this semester instead of 32 because I think we missed one day earlier in the semester for Labor Day or something like that. So for session 23, oh, I went too fast. Go back for just a second. Today, we've got our typical preview and review in which I'll go back and cover some content from the Princess Bride Chapter 6, Part 1. And any remaining questions that you all have as a group, we can certainly attend to those before we move on to any new material. It's a little bit of a shorter lecture today over Chapter 6, Part 2. I've budgeted 40 minutes for it because, as you all know from our discussions in the past, interesting questions or avenues that are worth pursuing are sometimes difficult to predict. So I've padded that time frame today with a little extra time built in case we have other good questions or discussions about any of the content from Chapter 6. Then, like I said, today I do want to end a little bit on the early side, or I should say end the lecture on the early side so we leave enough time in our class for a preview of our argumentative essay. And I want to take at least 20 minutes to sort of go over the basics of that. Okay, that's pretty much the agenda for this class. One additional thing is a suggestion that over the weekend or between now and next Monday anyway, that you read The Princess Bride, Chapter 7, which starts on page 267 to 306. That's a little bit of a longer assignment. I think it's like 36 pages instead of the typical 30 pages or 37, somewhere in there. It may even be as many as 39. But I think that it's a fairly quick-paced chapter. A lot happens in it. But I do want to issue you a notification. Okay. So I'm going to stop share for a minute. So this is always a difficult issue to broach, especially with older texts or texts that are challenging for one reason or another. So it's customary today to issue what are called warnings or sensitivity warnings. There is some humor that comes up in chapter 7 that involves a slur against one of the characters, specifically Inigo Montoya. And it's played for humor because there's a hearing issue. However, in today's climate, it may not be perceived as humorous. So I just wanted to issue a word of caution. You'll know it when you come across it in the reading. But that is a trigger, a potential trigger for some of you, and I wanted to make you aware of it. It's something that within the context of the text we'll certainly need to get into, but difficult texts sometimes require critical thought and reading. So I wanted to make you aware of that so that you're prepared for it emotionally if that sort of thing impacts you, okay? So I just wanted to make sure that I issued that trigger warning. Okay. Now, on to the good stuff for today. I'm going to stop my video at this point. You're welcome to keep yours going or stop it. It's up to you. But like I said, it may be a little bit smoother for the presentation. Okay. So for today, we're going to be checking in on The Princess Bride, Chapter 6, Part 2. So our story thus far includes the fact that Wesley has been captured by the sadist Count Rugen and has been subjected to the tortures of the machine, a sort of ominous device with all sorts of clamps and suction hoses that supposedly sucks the life out of its victims. Now, we learn that the machine is housed in the 5th level of the Zoo of Death, which is Prince Humperdinck's private stable of dangerous beasts and hunting trophies. The 5th level, of course, up to this point had been left abandoned, so that eventually when the perfect subject came along, such as Wesley, the machine could be assembled in the 5th level, and Count Rugen and Prince Humperdinck engaged one of their
your mic is going crazy.
Okay, thank you. So, can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's still like kind of crackling,
yeah,
staticky. There you go.
Okay. But like I was saying, where was I? Yes. Prince Humperdinck and Count Rugen engage in their favorite pastimes in the 5th level of the Zoo of Death, which is that of horrendous torture. So I have to pause here for a minute and open this up for debate. You know, between Count Rugen and Prince Humperdinck, the question is bandied about which is worse, torture of the body or torture of the mind? And interestingly, before he subjects Wesley to the machine, Count Rugen says, I'm going to suspect that you, Wesley, are preparing your mind for torture, but I'm not sure that's going to work against the machine I have devised. And so for the first time in the book, Wesley seems to have come up against a couple of adversaries who are almost as smart as he is. Rugen in particular is fascinated by the nature of pain. So I ask this question for debate here, and I'll write this into the chat. Is Wesley up against someone who is his match in Count Rugen and Prince Humperdinck? So I typed that into the chat. Curious to see what you all have to say. Any initial thoughts? Devin, how about you? Do you think Wesley has met his match in Count Rugen, or do you think he's challenged by these villains? What do you say?
I'm going with as much as the torture of the body is, painful. If your mind is able to hold up to that, like the term, your resolve is very strong. I think he'll be able to hold up.
Okay.
I don't think I gotten that far into part two yet.
Fair enough, but I agree that there is something to be said about leaving the pain of the body behind. And I want to tie a little bit of historical context into this reading. Remember that the novel was published.
Your mic is staticky and gay.
Okay, thanks. Don't know if there's much I can do.
I would like to speak.
Go ahead, Sonia.
Well, I think I haven't read all of chapter 7 as well, but just looking at the previous chapters before and how he chased her down across the water, made the mountaintops, did the sword fight and all of that and more, I think he has it to make it. I think he can endure it. I don't believe he's met his match. I think he can endure the challenge.
Yeah, that's good evidence to suggest that Wesley is up to the challenge, I think. Specifically, like I said, if you give this a historical context of being published in 73, what was the major sort of historical conflict for the U.S. in that period?
The U.S. and who?
The U.S. What was the major conflict for the U.S. in that period?
In 73,
Yeah.
was it, oh my God, now you get me thinking. Well, I know about the Kennedy and Khrushchev and Kagame and all that. And,
I don't know.
And we're talking about
What the heck am I
Vietnam or
saying?
something, right? I don't know.
Yeah, you got it, Sonia. You're right.
Oh, okay. Well, that was a fight we just didn't win. I mean, it was a losing battle. There were no real winners on either side, whether it be Vietnam or America. There was no real winners.
Yeah, I
It really
think
wasn't.
that's in many ways that's a good assessment of the historical view of that war. But we do know that in this time, Americans in particular were very sensitive to the issue of torture, because the first stories by 1973 had begun to come in to the United States. And people like John McCain even would find a way mentally to sort of escape from the pressure and the oppression that went on during their imprisonment in POW camps. So there was an interesting...
I have to say this on behalf. No, finish. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, so there's kind of an interesting connection here between how much emphasis is placed on the horrible things that happened to Wesley. More so than I think, if we were going back to the frame device, a father telling his son a story. There's a greater potential here, I think, for him to slow down and pay more attention to that, because I think on one level, Goldman's trying to be a little bit sympathetic to that idea and to the sensitivity of his readers in reflection to how this conflict had impacted the lives of so many Americans. Go ahead, Sonia.
I was just going to say, when you were saying how Americans were sensitive to torture, I gather if you are directly there being tortured, you know, John McCain and all of them in Vietnam, or whether it be World War II or whatever it is. But then again, I sort of question America on being sensitive to torture. When did it stop being, when did you stop being sensitive to torture? When did it kick in? You know what I mean? When I look at America and the racism here and the torture you did to people, yet you go to another country and you defend people and you say, it's not right to, you know, torture our men, which of course they're fighting, or the people in those countries, but then you come back to your own country and you do the same. So where does it stop? Where does the sensitivity kick in?
And that's
You know,
a really good question.
I mean, what I'm seeing is a double standard. Yes, the serviceman was tortured, but you're fighting. You knew what to expect. But what about when you're a civilian and you don't expect to be tortured and you are? Whether it be in America or another country, it's all the same, except I rescue you from your torture, but I have to go back home to torture.
Right.
That's what I'm doing with this. When you brought that up, it made me, well, wait, when did it stop? Because
Right.
John McCain was, I think he's like my parents. He was born in the 40s. Well, in the 40s, there was still torture in America. It
Yeah.
didn't stop until really the early 60s. So when does the sense of, and in Great Britain, when I look at and listen to some of the rock singers like Zeppelin, Robert Plant, and all these people, they had to have an outlet because they were part of the war. And they didn't want to endure that, what they had seen in England. So they went to music to find ways to escape it. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, there's a whole host of interesting questions there. And I'm going to have to be a broken record here, but that would be a great potential topic for a paper that that you or any of your fellow students could pursue for our next paper project. And I think that's you've raised some great questions. So a couple of things I want to address before we move on is that not only is that a great question in terms of the differential between torture as treatment for non-combatants. You know, if you go back and listen to some of these stories about protesters during the Vietnam era, the way that they were treated by police in, say, Chicago during the Democratic Convention of 1968. That was pretty close to, or pretty, you know, akin to torturous treatment. And beyond that, skipping way ahead in time rather, to our own treatment of enemy combatants in the wake of 9/11. There have been people in the military who have questioned whether or not, you know, that treatment is ethical. And whether or not we're toying around with the edges of what's been approved under the Geneva Conventions, which are a long-standing pact between nations about how they will treat prisoners of war. So it's like you said, Sonia, it's a very complex question.
Well, it is. When I look at, like, I love documentaries. I guess this is just my thing with this book. It's amazing how we go from humor to seriousness. But like when they would take the German POW prisoners to, you know, England and America and countries like that, or even Russia, England and America are very civilized. And again, we have to look at the greater evil. America is evil too, compared to Russia, which is the greater evil. Russia. They had 26,000 POW Germans here. Only close to 600 wanted to return home, and the rest wanted to stay in America. They didn't want to go home. Same in England. It's so many because it's a different. But in Russia, the numbers are not the same because Russia doesn't play with anyone.
Right.
Again, I say there's no Nazism in Russia. It's not going to happen. They got the Kremlin. So what happens there? They did not return a lot of the Germans home. They were killed over there or died in the camps, as opposed to England and America that were more, you know, America. And I understand where America is going. We need to change the mindset of these men so that they won't go back and try to do this again. And I understood that, but then when we looked at the 9/11, we torture these guys. Well, what happened to the mindset of changing these people?
Right, and that, like I said, you brought up some interesting evidence, and that could be used to make a compelling case, either against our belief system or our treatment of our enemies or the treatment of our own citizens, and that might make for a potentially really good paper that you could sink your teeth into. So I think that's a good point. Okay,
Thank
I've
you.
got to move. Go
Could
ahead.
I add a little bit?
All
real
right,
quick?
yeah, sure, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
I was
it's
just
all right.
gonna say something about. I think part of what Sonia and even like some of the others had to say, kind of comes down to. I think personally, a lot of the leadership and kind of like ideals that were being held like almost sacred during those times, like she was saying, like 9/11, and like more about like pre like I don't want to, how do they, like, what would they say, like Cold War type era where they would,
That's right.
it was like communism versus capitalism, you
Yep.
know? So
Mhm.
I was really kind of concerned over the fact that like it was touched upon that there was like, POWs and stuff, but a lot like no, I don't think anyone mentioned that there's like the Eighth Amendment, and a lot of the ideas that come with that are supposed to be reflected by, like our soldiers and like our leaders and stuff, and like our beliefs.
Mhm.
And like the Eighth Amendment pretty much says, like there shouldn't be any cruel, unusual punishment or anything that would be, almost considered like, not like blasphemous, but like, what do they say when you like almost like a hypocritical kind of statement, where
Yeah.
you preach one thing and do another, and
Double standards.
Mhm.
and that was kind of like my biggest thing that I've kind of noticed was that, again, we do have rules for like our own people and stuff, but a lot of people argue that they need to be applied to like other situations, like these complicated ones that we were talking about. That's been the biggest kind of fluctuation in the last even like 30 years or so, since like the 80s, was that different leaders have different opinions on how to enforce those rules and stuff.
Mhm.
So that's been like a really like hot topic for debate, is why and when we're in wars, like how to actually go about fighting them.
Yeah. And
Good point, Lucas.
yeah, excellent point. I agree. And this concept in literature has not been something that is new. If you go back to the Shakespearean play, Much Ado About Nothing, you have one of the central characters in that play is a torturer. That's his business. He runs the dungeon. And even there's quite a bit of comedy that's played up in this business. And in the film adaptation, of course, of our own book, there's a bit of comedy with the idea of the machine. The machine can't literally suck life out of anybody. We know there's probably been nothing like that. But especially if you start looking at the contemporary novels that come up with The Princess Bride, you have One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I think that was just 4 years before it. And you have some books that follow on the heels of The Princess Bride that deal with some of the issues of torture, like Little Dieter Dreams of Flying, which was turned into a really good movie called Rescue Dawn, if you've never seen that. And Hollywood in particular used a lot of these narratives in and around the issue of torture and revenge. And but it was just a product of its era. And though it's a fantasy novel, it kind of carries on this very unique tradition of questioning ourselves as a society about what is appropriate and how we treat people who have either not been proven guilty, as is the case of Wesley. Remember that important detail from the first part of chapter 6. They keep asking him why he wanted to kidnap the princess or whom he was working for. And he says, nobody. I wasn't working for anyone. It was just my sole action alone. There was no conspiracy. And they are torturing him under the premise that they want information because they suspect he may have done something, even though they actually know in truth he didn't. So yeah, this is.
He should have said he's working for Gilder.
Yeah, right. He could have ended it a lot sooner that way, perhaps. But we shall see how that evolves.
You know,
Yeah.
They might have let him go and been like, "Yeah, go finish your job, dude."
Yeah. Who knows? Who knows? Okay, I'm going to go back to our PowerPoint here. So we also meet an important but smaller character in the cast in chapter 6. That's Yellen. And of course, somebody who controls the brute squad, that's a very obvious on-the-nose joke, right? Because he's constantly yelling or yelling at his men to do something or other. But because the prince can't spend all day torturing people, he uses Buttercup's prior kidnapping as a cover and orders Chief Yellen, the chief of enforcement, to clear the thieves' quarter. Now, this is kind of interesting because it runs into another very current topic or apropos topic for our own lives, which, believe me, had not been planned way back when I started, speculating about using this book. But, we often hear about concerns regarding police brutality and appropriate treatment for citizens. And yet we have somebody here in a position of authority. And there's no question in this case, in the case of the Princess Bride, that it's called a brute squad. Their intentions are very openly to be brutal and to deal with people in ways that are less than, shall we say, civilized. So we have an example here of another person who is forming or being asked to form a brute squad. So that brings us into the new material for today, chapter 6, part 2. Yellen, again, is a new, unique character. And interestingly, he is described as one of the few non-nobles that Prince Humperdinck would even consider trusting. We learn that there's also, a family layer of involvement here. His father had previously held the position as chief of the brute squad. And he's actually a cousin to the albino who runs the torture chamber in the Zoo of Death. But, which is odd detail from the book. But his introduction and the portion in which he's introduced provides a nice segue into the description of the torture machine, because he hears it tested before he leaves the king's chamber. And the sound that it makes, we find out, comes from a dog. So the first time it's tested, it is on a dog, and then it's tested on Wesley. Yellen is also important as a thematic device, or rather, I should say, a storytelling device, because it's through Yellen and the clearing of the thieves' quarter, and specifically the instance at Falkbridge's alehouse, that we meet a certain fencer or meet back up with a certain fencer who is giving the brute squad some trouble. So Yellen dispatches his two best men, one really loud and boisterous fellow and another larger, quiet person. And then, of course, the quiet person ends up being Fezzik. And we learn that after he had holed up in a cave in the aftermath of Vizzini's death, he had done some fishing when he moved on to Gilder and heard about some preparations in Florin for the wedding, and that they had needed some muscle to complement the brute squad. So he joined. So two of them, the two friends, the brandy drinker, who of course is Inigo Montoya, meets up with Fezzik, who saves him from the other louder brute and nurses him back to health. It's interesting that in the film, it's not really explained where they have the recuperation scenes, and they're played for great comedy, but we don't really know where that takes place. And now we get the answer from reading the text. It is in Falkbridge's alehouse. Everything in the Thieves' Quarter except this inn has been cleared out. So Fezzik and Inigo really have this place to themselves. Fezzik begins to deliver news daily to Inigo as he recuperates. He feeds him. He makes sure he gets plenty of sleep. He even at one point makes sure that he dips him in alternating tubs of cold and hot water to try to get him to sober up a little bit. But of all the pieces of information Fezzik brings back, it's that Count Rugen, the six-fingered man, is here in Florin. And so now, after all these years, Inigo Montoya has his opportunity for vengeance, although it couldn't come at a worse time for him physically. Now, if this seems familiar, it's because it should be, right? We've already seen it in the novel once. Specifically, this scene mirrors the reading of the story between Goldman and his father and the grandfather/grandson in the film adaptation. So there's something about this returning theme, and I don't remember if it was in this class or not, but one of you in your papers, one of my students in the paper, brought up the idea that the telling of the story was part of what actually aided in Goldman's recuperation. It almost seems as if stories have a somewhat magical character to them that can actually not only help soothe one's mind, but perhaps address the issues of the body as well. Okay, I'm going to come back here for a video for just a minute. And, oops, let me see here. I want to, start video. I'm going to open this up for a discussion for a few minutes. First, number one, does Yellen and the Brute Squad remind you of some of the issues related to contemporary concerns about police brutality and treatment? So that's number one. And then number two, we're going to talk a little bit about this idea of whether or not the act of storytelling has any kind of recuperative quality beyond just the context of the device as it's used in The Princess Bride. So I'd be interested to see what you have to say about that. Don't forget to use your little emoticon reactions to raise your hand or to say, yes, that makes sense.
Where is that in? I'll raise my hand.
Yeah, it's in your reactions tab.
Okay, then.
Yeah.
Can I raise my hand?
Go ahead. Go ahead, Sonia.
Well, I want to say, first of all, because of my age with some of this, you're talking about police brutality. I guess I have to go back to the days, and you may know what I'm talking about. When we speak of, this is nothing compared back into the day. When we had Chicago and Hanrahan, and the police going after people and the Blackstone Rangers and all that. This is a mild version of what went on back in the late 60s going into the early 70s. When you see police shooting, racial profiling, this is really nothing. And what
I
I'm
was thinking like the 90s even.
right, but what I'm saying is like Fred Hampton. I don't know if you're familiar with Fred Hampton. Some may be, some not. But he was an activist for the west side of the Black community. They went in when they killed him. He was lying in bed in underwear, but they killed him. And then the only reason that one of the Blackstone Range or whatever they are on the west side survived is because he ran outside with no clothes on. He was nude. That way they couldn't say he had a gun on him with his hands up in the air. But they didn't, like Huey Newton in Chicago or in California, when he got out of prison in the early 2000s, they made sure he came up dead. So it hasn't stopped. I don't believe it's going to stop. And I also believe that as a Black, we need to be accountable. How can you come after the police when your own is still killing within your own community? Who's going to take you serious? Who? You can't, what, it's okay to say, well, I understand that a law and they're supposed to make a difference. But life is life. Right is right. Death is death. Whether it be Mr. Fowler killing or me, we both have committed a crime of taking someone's life. And it's not, so I don't really get down with the leadership of where they're going with this, because in the Black community, you're killing every day. Where do you go with it?
It's
he's a white off.
It's a hell of a thing.
It's a multi-layered.
I understand the whole point.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying. Please don't take me wrong. Well, they're only focusing on killing the Black guy. I agree. But the Black guy is still killing the Black guy too.
It's
That's
definitely a complex and multi-layered
Screw ourselves over.
discussion. But I only had one thing I wanted to mention. If you're unfamiliar with the murder of, you said his name earlier, Fred Hampton, right?
Hampton.
Yeah. I believe
Right.
that's mentioned briefly in this new Netflix film, The Trial of the Chicago 7, that came out. So that may be a way, if you're curious about this, maybe if you have some free time to watch that movie. It's a pretty good movie. And it raises some questions
really
about this issue in a context removed from the current debate, but it brings it up in a context that I think in some ways allows a viewer to watch the film because it happened so long ago, but think about its implications for where we are today. And so that's my only 2 cents there. Sorry, I stepped over what you're saying.
Well, the only reason I could sort of speak on it, my cousin Diane, that was his girlfriend. She was in the house as well.
Okay.
He lives in Michigan now. The state settled back then for like $400,000. That was a lot of money back in the early 70s or late 60s. Also, I'm not a communist, but I did find out that, with McCarthy era, a lot of people were accused of being communists. And, it ruined a lot of people's lives, especially in Hollywood. But I like what I heard a Jewish survivor say out of Auschwitz. America was more concerned with communism than they were saving the people from the camps. And that is why this happened. And what give me is Russia played all of us. They played Germany and they played America, one against the other. And in the end, they won too. Because remember, they sided with Germany, but Germany did them in, so they went to war with them. And then America concerned about communism, and we had communism over here. We can't have that here, which I agree. I wouldn't want communism either. I work too hard to get my stuff away. I'm just saying, I'm a sharer, but there's a lot involved with this here. I think bad leadership is the problem at this point.
Yeah, that's certainly an interesting take on the situation.
Why can't we all just get along?
Right.
Well, we were spirits without colors and faces, we could, but unfortunately, there is something called a face and a color, and it matters to people. I love everyone. I do. I love everyone. I think I like Mr. Fowler, especially when he give me my grade on my paper. We'll see if I still like him.
Fair enough. But Devin, I thought you were speaking up earlier. Did you have something to contribute or something else to explore here?
Not really. Just. Not really.
Okay. All right. How about before we leave this, anybody else have another idea or more ideas to offer up?
I have like another example I could give.
Okay, give us another example.
Kind of something I was thinking about.
Then we'll probably have to move on for time purposes. Go ahead.
I was thinking kind of the similarities between like the camps created by the Russians and the Germans to hold their prisoners compared to the camps that were created here in the US to hold non-prisoners who became prisoners through misguidance almost. So like during the 70s and like the late 60s, like Sonia was talking about, a lot of Asian Americans were discriminated against.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a big thing of the time, was that, you know, a lot of people didn't trust, you know, foreigners of really any kind. And due to Asians being a more prominent and more, I don't want to say like more easily identified, but just profiled and racially like discriminated against.
Yeah.
A lot of those communities suffered greatly, like even in, I would say almost comparable as today's like idea of discrimination against Asians, just due to, you know, all the tension that's going on right now. So that's why when she was saying the stuff about the blacks and the other people that have been, you know, a part of the long history of discrimination in the country, like I think that was one that usually gets overlooked, and I just wanted to bring it up and just kind of add it in there as something to think about.
Yeah, another very good example and another good potential topic for exploration for the argumentative paper that's coming up.
Thank
Okay,
you.
let's quickly then move to that second question or concern. What about this idea? It's a little bit more fantastical, but yet perhaps it is something that might provoke someone to a creative topic, and therefore would be worthy of our time for discussion. This idea that storytelling or proximity with family can enhance the recuperative process, or can help somebody perhaps regain their vitality in some ways. Is this complete fiction, do you think, to facilitate the framing of the book, or is there something behind this idea? Any thoughts or concerns about this concept?
I actually believe that idea. Storytelling is a great way to, you know, regain your sense of self and things like that. A friend of mine was actually going through a sort of mental kick or something. I don't know what to call it, but yeah, she was going through a real problem where she felt like that she was responsible for many of people's actions. And I'm like, no, okay, no, you need to go back. You need to talk about this. I'm not one, considering that we're both on the internet. I'm not really one who can help you out with this. You need to come talk this with your family about what you're going through. And for the most part, it worked for her. And I'm glad for that.
Yeah, you know, that's a really good example, because sometimes conversation and it's not necessarily storytelling like with the Princess Bride in that scenario, but to explain a position or to let the floodgates open with someone that is trustworthy. You would be that trustworthy person in the scenario you described, Devin. That can be very helpful, just in terms of a way to release tension, if nothing else. And sometimes, like, you know, if you go back to I think it's the Old Testament in the Bible, there's even this story that today strikes us as very odd, but it was about a man of faith who, I can't remember if it was his brother. I think it was his brother, but it may have been his son. And his son had died from some sort of strange malady. And he prayed, and he was told, under the context of the mythology of that religion, to lay on his body on top of that person's body. And he was told to do so for 3 days. And the person woke up, they recovered. Now, there's a lot of speculation there about what could have potentially happened. But the point is that sometimes physical proximity, like storytelling, can help somebody relax, can help some of these conditions that develop, maybe not go away, but at least abate for a short period of time. I was listening to a podcast the other day with Steven Tyler, the lead singer of Aerosmith, and he talked about going to a specific recording studio, and he was recording a version of a Bob Marley song, and he said he just wanted to go over and touch the walls, and he said when he was getting a tour of the studio and he touched the walls, that he just had this welling of emotion, and because of everything that had all the history that he was surrounded by. And he said, I was kind of loath to admit it, but I got a little bit weepy. I actually cried a little bit because of the history that I was surrounded by and involved with. So there are certain people in our society too, artists like Bob Marley, artists like Steven Tyler, maybe artists like William Goldman, who in some way, shape, or form are able to connect to people through their art, or are able to use their art to help people work through some of these tensions. That's another interesting topic that might be an argumentative style of paper that someone could get into, that someone could research. I don't know. Any other thoughts or ideas? I appreciate, Devin, what you said. Any follow-up from you on that?
Well, I'll say something else here. I remember a time back in my past where I was also going through a dark time where I just felt really down. I doubted myself and things like that. I distanced myself from my friends because I felt like I couldn't really approach them in my current state. And then be able to meet these other people on the other end of the spectrum that also have been through such dark times. It was like, okay, I knew how to get myself out of here eventually. I didn't want to stay here. And these people that I came across really helped me to, get back on my feet, figure out who I am, who I want to be. I want to be an artist and share my stories and, show my skill to the world and things of that nature.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I'm glad that you were able to have that experience. And it just goes to show that, with creative thinking, and depending on how much you read into a text, even a text that's fairly, benign and sort of surface like The Princess Bride, it has depths to explore if you want to explore them. So if any of these topics are, if you're feeling energized by these things, or you're percolating toward, some of these concepts, pursue them, because the chances are good that will create or generate within you as a writer, as a student, some kind of a field of interest, or at least it will give you some prime you, so to speak, as a writer to produce a good paper. Okay, Lucas has a concern. Go ahead, Lucas.
Oh, I was just gonna kind of add on to the discussion terms that going back to what you kind of originally said about how the storytelling and stuff can help people and other kinds of things like that. I think a lot of times what the storytelling really comes down to is whoever the storyteller is being able to really break down their emotions and their feelings and express them in a way that is understandable for people, because again, like Devin was saying, not everyone has kind of that person they can go and talk to necessarily.
Yeah.
So for them to be able to write it out and express it themselves, how they would truly feel or intend or want to, describe something, I think that's a really big part of playing that that freeing factor almost, where, you know, someone is allowed to be like creative and, you know, express themselves how they actually feel. And I think that storytelling aspect really can like open up a lot of people in a way, and open up others to how like they feel, or, you know, like maybe give them a little better understanding of how to deal with like a certain scenario or situation or something. And
Yeah.
that's why I was just thinking like storytelling in a lot of ways can be kind of like multifaceted or like layered, where, you know, someone may almost even give like a false, you know, like story just to like hide or cover up something, or, you know, express like hidden concerns, you know. So like it's one of those things where like it can be very like two-sided and how revealing someone wants to be, but I think it can also show a lot about like how that person like views those kinds of topics and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
One says with a grain of salt.
I had something else about your original question, but I can't quite remember it.
Okay, if you remember, you can always put it into the chat or type it into the chat, and I can circle back around and later it in. Devin, I see your
You're
hand
good.
emoticons up as well. Anything else to add to this idea or this discussion?
Yes, I would like to go back to the yelling thing about police brutality. I like to put something on the other end of the spectrum here. What's Sonia? I believe I'm saying it wrong, but the whole thing about killing being a crime. For those like, you know, the long and the long arm of the law, I don't know what the term is, but if killing is a crime, what's to say when the time comes we have to make that choice? If a villain's on the loose, to what extent are you willing to stop them?
Hmm.
And that goes for both sides of like the military and the common police. When the time comes for them to actually, you know, end someone's life, will they do it?
I agree. I think that's a very valid
Morals and
question.
ethics.
And what I like to say is, to each crime or each decision, it must match up. Meaning, if you were a murderer out there just to kill someone, to rob someone, to rape someone, you know what your charges are, and you know what you're about to happen. But if it's a military situation where countries are fighting, and when I said I'm a very fair and equal person, especially with men, I have been so hard on men all my days, and may God forgive me. But when I look at how men have fought in wars, whether for the good or for the bad, they were willing to sacrifice their lives, yet they were willing to do what they thought was right with leadership in their countries. So in that stance, you have to evaluate on the terms of, okay, this was a military situation. How do we handle punishing this person? As opposed to just a random shooting or police brutality. Is it justifiable? Believe me, it has to match up. And every case is not, oh, well, they're no longer under the law, or they were a terrorist. Let's go back and let's reevaluate this. Let's see where they're coming from. I don't believe every German soldier was a bad person. You cannot tell me that. Do you realize how scary it is to be in a situation like that?
Right.
And you don't know if you're going to live or not, because if you go against the regime, you could be killed too. And trust me, Germans were made a difference too. There's a lot at stake there. You know, somebody says, how come the Jews didn't fight? You get scared. You don't know what to do either. I don't know, but I know that it matches up. There, you can evaluate it. They're supposed to be good thinkers. This is 2020, not early 1900 or World War II. We're supposed to learn from our mistakes. We have technology, we have all of that, and we're still doing things 20 years ago that should have been corrected. Yeah. No.
And that raises an interesting question about the book as well. Like, what was the crime that the people of the Thieves' Quarter had committed? Okay, certainly there's probably some evidence, if it's called the Thieves' Quarter, that they were, you know, some of them have been involved in theft, but they describe in detail the capture and arrest of the guy who runs the ale house, Falkbridge. And Falkbridge he wasn't a thief. He was a guy who served the community. And he's brutally taken in, knocked unconscious, and thrown into the wagon. So Falkbridge really didn't do anything except say, hey, you know, I run a business. It's not good business for me to just allow you to come in here yelling and toss all of my patrons into the bar. And for his trouble, of course, he's just thrown in right behind them. So yeah, I mean, good questions. When do we draw that line? That's maybe a great topic for an extended paper. Okay, time unfortunately is running low. So let's finish the presentation.
Time is of the essence.
Yeah, we're gonna finish that presentation here. Okay, let's move on. So in the midst of all of these preparations for the wedding, Buttercup actually does some self-advocation, and which I was happy to see for her character development. She's smart enough to catch Humperdinck in a lie because he brags to Yellen about the details for their honeymoon, mentioning that all of the ships in the Florin Armada will be taking them or escorting them. And of course, she says to him, well, all but your 4 fastest, right? Because he had promised to send 4 fastest ships in the Armada in each of the cardinal directions to catch up to Wesley on the Revenge, his ship. So when she catches him in the lie, he gets very angry. And again, we see another instance of Buttercup, another woman being physically attacked. In this case, he, grabs her by her hair and forces her into her room and locks it. And then he goes from there directly to the Zoo of Death. And so here we get another aside. And I've actually mentioned this earlier during last session's discussion, but this is where Goldman's father stops, and Goldman, the young version of Goldman, says, hey, you tried to skip over a part. You said that Humperdinck was going to the Zoo of Death, and then you tried to skip around back to Fezzik and Inigo. Then he says, I want to know what happened. He says, are you sure that you really want to know what's happening? Because you're into this book kind of intensely. And young Goldman, of course, says, yeah, I want to know. I wouldn't have said so otherwise. And his father is therefore forced to admit 2 fairly devastating spoilers, which is that Wesley does die in the Zoo of Death, and Humperdinck doesn't die in the book. He lives. And we end the chapter with the scream. Okay, so when he goes to confront Wesley in the torture chamber, his anger, Humperdinck's anger, gets the better of him. He elevates the pressure all the way to 50, and the scream that comes from Wesley is heard throughout all of Florin. Specifically, Goldman explains that Buttercup hears it in her room. Inigo and Fezzik hear it. Yellen hears it on his way back to the main gate. The brutes on the brute squad stop eating and they listen to it. And even the commoners in the city square, the town square, hear it. And everybody's kind of shaken and afraid by this. The only person who's not quite afraid, of course, is Inigo, because he reasons that it must be the man in black. His true love is going to marry another person, so who else would have reason for such misery? So A, they follow the sound, or they reason it must be the man in black. B, they follow the sound because they know they need his strategy to combine with Inigo's swordsmanship and Fezzik's strength. And C, they follow them all the way to the Zoo of Death, where they find the albino. Now, in the film version, Inigo tells Fezzik to jog his memory, in which Fezzik just bumps him on the head and he's out. But in the story, in the novel, Fezzik waits in the wings as Inigo takes him by sword point and forces him to give him details about the Zoo of Death. And then after he gives him all the pertinent details, Fezzik, of course, swallows him up in a big bear hug and he passes out. This leads us in a fairly precarious place for the conclusion of the chapter, because our two heroes are headed into the zoo of death. Fezzik and Inigo head down into the zoo of death to face its many horrors. Which means for next time, you'll get to read all about that as you complete chapter 7. Now, like I said, it's a little bit longer than our traditional reading, but have hope, because as it says there, mostly dead is still slightly alive. Okay. Now, we've got about 15 minutes left, and I wanted to share this last document with you. And you've seen these kinds of things before, but we're still going to walk through them. This is just a preliminary. And like I said, I know you're going to have a lot of questions and some concerns, but let's just walk through the first part today. Okay, so this is argument as assignment. That's a pretty substantive part of your grade, about equal to the persuasive paper that you wrote, even though the argument is a little bit more challenging. First of all, let's talk about the due date. This isn't going to be due until the final full week of class, and that's Friday, 4th of December. So I know it's still early now. It's about a month away, but that's going to go very quickly. Okay, so due in about a month from today. It's going to be worth another 100 points, but the length is much more substantive this time. 1,250 words or more. That's roughly equivalent to about 5 pages, including the works cited page. So when you are driving toward that 1,250, 1,000 words, just to put it in perspective, is about 4 full pages. So when we're talking about that 5th page, you know, it's probably not going to be a 5th full page, just to put you at ease, a little bit at ease. It's going to include the same standard format that we've seen all semester long, but this time I'm going to suggest that you use 4 sources to help back up your claims. Go ahead. Go ahead, Lucas.
No, I was just saying, okay.
Oh, okay. Lucas, your hand emoticon's up. Did you have a question?
Oops, sorry, my bad. I don't know how to unchange that.
Oh, okay.
Oh, never mind.
All right.
I have to click raise and lower. I have to lower my hand. I'm sorry.
All right. No big deal. No big deal.
Give your arm a break, man.
So for the description, what are we actually doing here? Here, you're going to demonstrate your ability to develop a thesis that's a response to another author's ideas and present your thesis with persuasive claims and support, all while following the structure of a college-level argument. So of your 4 sources, one of those sources, just one, should actually be an argument that you agree with or disagree with. Now, for Monday's session, I'm going to show you an example, a couple of examples about how to set up your paper using such a source. Now, you will shape this assignment around your personal interests, or I would suggest your field of study or intended major. Your thesis will be, the result of your own thinking and logic, and your end product should reflect a mastery of persuasive structure, as well as some strategies you'll apply beyond this course in your academic and professional career. Again, the paper should synthesize research that you learned in the lecture, or learned about or discussed in the lecture material, while taking a distinct stance on a topic or issue, perhaps even encouraging your reader to take some kind of action. Again, the paper should include a brief literature review of your 4 articles, that were referenced in preparation for the essay. So that's the basic description. Now, give me just a few more seconds, because I know that I have some big time fans of the book, and I have some students who are going to want to write about their own topics. However, for those of you who are big fans of the book, possible topics related directly to The Princess Bride, which would be appropriate for an argumentative paper like this one, may include revisiting your ad analysis paper to complete a Google Images or Pinterest search comparing the posters of the foreign releases and newer posters and ad campaigns that were designed around the Princess Bride film. What is new? What is different? Are there visual cues and images added to the poster that clarify what the story is about? And how do these new or different versions appear superior in any way? Now, you could also write about the fact that despite Goldman having written the screenplay for the adaptation of The Princess Bride, there are significant differences between the two. Here, you could set up a standard comparison contrast paper between the film and the book and identify as many distinctions and differences as you can. Why do you feel Goldman allowed these changes to be made? And with which choices do you agree and which do you disagree? You can also compare the relationships between men in the novel. Goldman and his father, Fezzik and Inigo, Domingo and Inigo, Goldman and his fictional son, Jason, and compare those relationships to those between men and women, like Wesley and Buttercup specifically. Which of the two, male friendships or female-male friendships or relationships, are presented more positively? And why do you think that might be the case? Lastly, it's often said that those on the path of vengeance should dig two graves, one for their victims and one for themselves. So specifically, reflect on Inigo Montoya and his quest for revenge. Does this old adage apply to him as a character? And what does Inigo potentially miss out on as he pursues this path of vengeance over the course of his life? Those may be really interesting topics that are worth exploring if you're a big time fan of the book. If you're not, if you like the book well enough, that's fine. I know every student's not going to be in love with every text. And realistically, at this point, you've already written one paper for me for The Princess Bride, which is sufficient. You may use this next assignment to pursue your own interests, as the description said. We do have a few minutes now here at the end of the class if anybody has some immediate questions about the paper.
I think I like number 4 because of how he was unhappy with the death of his father and seeking vengeance, and he never could be happy. And that's how the Sicilian was able to win him over as a criminal, you know, him up and all of that stuff. So I think that he missed out on
happiness.
Yeah.
You know, so that, yeah, like number 4.
That would be I think that's an interesting topic. Having gone through this other paper process now, though, I know that the vast majority of you got used to the idea of pursuing support materials that were a little bit less traditional than you might have originally intended. And you did a masterful job with that. So if anybody else is interested in option 4, you can do that. You might have to pursue some different avenues to get good support for your perspective. But like I said, if you're not interested in any of those prompts, you don't have to write about them. You can pursue your own agenda or topic and write the best paper that you're able to write with the time available. The easiest.
Speaking of that, what were like
Yeah.
the other topics that we like brought up during the during our recording, during our discussion? What were the other topics we brought up?
So we could talk about
Uh,
Buttercup's trajectory as a character and how she evolves for the better or the worse as a character, how she grows. We've talked about ideas and themes related to concepts of valor and what it means to be a brave person, what it means to ask questions about just today, what is morally correct in terms of the decisions that we make to decide whether or not it's appropriate to take a life. We talked about police brutality and whether or not these versions of the Brute Squad here are, reflective of any of the contemporary issues surrounding police behavior and responsibility to the citizenship. And we've talked about this concept of, can storytelling impact a person's physical or mental health for the better? So any of those topics might be potential paper topics that are worth pursuing as another
all right,
research idea.
all right, gotcha.
Good question. Again, I'll just conclude with this. If you're looking for the easiest possible route for a paper, because I know at this time in the semester, a lot of students have other things on their plate beyond this one class, I would suggest that you finish reading the book and you get a copy of the movie, which is widely available, and you just do the comparison contrast. And if you do that, I think you're going to adequately meet the page amount, the page requirement, and be totally fine. And that's a good, thorough argument to engage in. Not everybody likes the comparison contrast papers, though. So, but
No, it's not even that. It's like, I gotta get
That's
this,
what I
get
would-
this movie that probably.
that's what I would think of as the easiest.
I'm not even gonna keep it around. I gotta get it anyway.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Good questions, good discussion. Anything else before I wrap things up for today?
Just the grade on
For me, sir.
Okay. Yep. I'm gonna get to that this afternoon. I'll get it to you as soon as I'm finished. Okay.
If you like it, I do.
All right. Well, that is
Alrighty.
our time for today, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for your attention and your contributions. I will talk to you next week. Take care, everyone.
You too.
Take care,
Sounds
sir.
good. Thank you.